37 years ago, on March 8, 1988, one of the worst terrorist attacks in the history of the USSR took place. On that day, members of the famous Irkutsk jazz band Seven Simians, seven musician brothers and their mother, hijacked a passenger plane, flying their Irkutsk-Kurganland route. Chasing their dream of a better life, the Ovchkin family carefully crafted their plan. But the attempted hijacking ultimately cost most of them their lives, and the survivors ended up in prison. How did a talented musical group turn into an organized criminal gang, ready to commit a terror attack? Why did the musicians decide to hijack a plane? And what became of those who survived? Once upon a time, there lived the Seven Simians. In the early 1980s, an extraordinary musical group from Irkutsk captivated the entire Soviet Union. The Seven Simians. The jazz band consisted of seven brothers aged 5 to 21. Vasily, Dmitry, Oleg, Sasha, Igor, Misha, and Sergei Ovchkin shared the stage with Alla Pugacheva and Iosif Kobzon. They were applauded by Soviet film stars, party officials, and even Western audiences. Newspapers, radio, and television all told stories about this cheerful family. And in 1985, a documentary film about the Seven Simians was made. In that film, the Ovechkins appeared as an exemplary Soviet family, the pride of their hometown and the whole country. But behind the polished facade hid bloody secrets and the harsh reality of rural poverty. The Ovechkin family had 11 children, 7 boys and 4 girls. They lived modestly in a small house without modern amenities on the outskirts of town. They ran a small farm, keeping cows, pigs, rabbits, and chickens. The mother adored her children, but demanded strict discipline and hard work. Since early childhood, the kids tended livestock, worked in the garden, and helped with the household in every possible way. The father drank heavily and terrorized the family, firing his hunting rifle right inside the house. In 1980, another drunken rampage ended in tragedy. Trying to restrain their father, the sons inflicted severe injuries on him, and he later died. Investigators ruled this an act of necessary self-defense, and no charges were filed. Left without a husband, Ninal Ovechkina took full responsibility for raising the children. Alongside her main job at a grocery store, she illegally sold vodka during the anti-alcohol campaign. Neighbors remembered that the family kept to themselves. They never invited guests and never visited anyone. Almost all of the children's free time was taken up by farm work and school. A lucky break. When the older sons, Vasya, Dima, and Oleg, suddenly showed interest in music, Ninal supported them and enrolled them in the Irkutsk Music College in the brass department. Later, the younger boys, Sasha, Igor, Misha, and Sergei, joined them. The girls were never allowed to study music. They had secondary roles in the strict family structure. The brothers' lives revolved around constant music practice. Their new passion wasn't just a hobby. They quickly began to show serious talent. In late 1983, with the support of their musical director Vladimir Romanenko, the boys formed the ensemble Seven Simians. The name was inspired by the Russian folk tale about 7 skillful brothers who impressed the Tsar. Vasily played drums, Dmitry the trumpet, Oleg the saxophone, Alexander the double bass, Igor the piano, Mikhail the trombone, and Sergei the banjo. Less than a year after they began rehearsing, the Ovechkins debuted at the Nessun School in Moscow and immediately drew attention. At the time, family ensembles were popular in the West but still unusual in the USSR. The peak of their fame came in 1985. The boys toured all over the Soviet Union, newspapers wrote about them, and they were shown on television. The local authorities even provided the family with 2 adjacent 3-room apartments in a new building. and the older brothers were admitted to the prestigious Nesson Institute without exams. However, within a few months they dropped out and returned to Irkutsk. Their teachers believed this was the start of star fever. As their fame grew, the family began to think that the jazz band could achieve far greater success if they managed to get to the West. These ideas intensified in 1987 when the Seven Simians toured Japan. In November, we visited Japan, a magical country. We traveled with an official delegation headed by the chairman of the city council. It was such an unusual, unique place, beautiful and astonishing. Those days felt like a dream. During the tour, the older brothers made several attempts to reach this embassy and request political asylum, but eventually decided if they were going to flee, the whole family had to go. To sawn off shotguns in a double bass case. But even in the late Soviet Union, leaving the country legally was almost impossible, so the Ovechkins decided to fight their way out. It was Oleg, the third oldest, who came up with the plan. Hijack a plane, take the passengers hostage, and force the pilots to land in a capitalist country. For example, the United Kingdom. Surprisingly, the rest of the family agreed, including their mother. The eldest daughter, Lyudmila, was already married and living separately, so she wasn't told about the plan. The family prepared thoroughly. First, they sold most of their belongings and emptied their savings accounts. Then they bought 2 shotguns from acquaintances, claiming they needed them for hunting. The guns were cut down into compact sawn-offs, and the brothers also made 3 bombs. On March 8, 1988, the Ovechkins arrived at the airport with their mother. They hid the weapons and explosives in a double bass case with a false bottom. The already bulky instrument was modified with a heavy sheet music stand attached to it, making it impossible to X-ray. A security officer recognized the famous musicians and only performed a cursory check, allowing them through. The flight from Irkutsk to Leningrad included a stop in Kurgan. The first leg went smoothly. Nearing Leningrad, Vasily Ovechkin handed a note to a flight attendant. It was written on a simple squared notebook page. Crew must fly to any capitalist country, England. Do not descend, or we will blow up the plane. Flight is under our control. While the senior flight attendant passed the message to the captain, Ninel instructed her sons to block the aisle to the rear lavatory. The brothers then pulled out their weapons and declared the passengers hostages. But the hijackers failed to consider many things. First, the crew had no experience with international flights. They didn't know the routes and didn't speak English. Second, the plane didn't have enough fuel for any country beyond Leningrad. The crew explained this to the hijackers, who then demanded to fly to Finland to refuel. The pilots contacted ground services for instructions. On the ground, authorities decided to deceive the hijackers. They would pretend to land in Finland but instead bring the plane to the military airfield, Veshevo near Vyborg. But as soon as they landed, Ninel immediately realized something was wrong. She saw soldiers and fuel trucks with Russian markings, following their mother's orders. The brothers tried to break into the cockpit and threatened to kill hostages. Vasily issued an ultimatum. If the plane didn't take off within half an hour, he would detonate a bomb. The crew desperately tried to calm the family. In panic, Dmitry Ovechkin shot and killed a flight attendant, Tamara Zharkaya. The older brothers ran through the cabin threatening passengers. Ground services continued delaying, waiting for the Alpha Special Forces unit to arrive, but everything went wrong. When the situation spiraled, local police, not trained for counterterrorism, decided to storm the plane. 2 officers climbed into the cockpit through a window using a rope, and immediately burst into the cabin, hoping the Ovechkins would surrender. They miscalculated. A shootout began. Receiving unexpected resistance, the police opened fire toward the rear of the plane. Rescuers later asked, "Where did all those bullets go?" "Into the cabin." "Why were so many passengers wounded?" "Because of that." The Ovechkins didn't shoot at the passengers in the front cabin, though they threatened them. During the firefight, reinforcements tried entering from the baggage compartment. The Ovechkins noticed and fired back. Within seconds, the family ran out of ammunition. Realizing the plan had failed, they chose to die rather than surrender. Vasily told his older sister Olga to take the younger children and give up. He assured her the minors wouldn't face punishment, and she herself hadn't taken an active part in the hijacking. The older brothers and their mother refused to surrender and moved to the tail of the plane. Of the 5 older brothers, only 17-year-old Igor survived. He hid in the lavatory. Before the end, the family detonated the bombs, causing a massive fire. Terrified passengers jumped from the burning plane without waiting for help. 15 people were severely injured, and 3 died in the smoke. 9-year-old Sergei Ovechkin was wounded. Some of the survivors were beaten by security forces, who suspected that members of the Ovechkin family might be hiding among them. One passenger recalled, "When I jumped and fell, as I started getting up, I was kicked in the jaw. I felt some metal object, later realized it was a gun barrel. They pushed me into the sand, cursed at me, and said if I moved, they'd shoot." By the time Alpha finally arrived, the aircraft was already a burning wreck. Of the 6 surviving Ovechkins, only 2 were of legal age, 17-year-old Igor and 28-year-old Olga, who was pregnant. The investigation lasted 7 months and filled 18 volumes. The court found them guilty. Igor received 8 years, Olga 6. The court likely considered mitigating factors: the boy's age and the woman's pregnancy. Neither was a mastermind of the attack. Both served for 0.5 years and were released early. The youngest siblings, 14-year-old Tanya, 13-year-old Misha, 10-year-old Ulyana, and 9-year-old Sergei, were taken in by their older sister Lyudmila, who was not involved in the hijacking. She also raised Olga's daughter while the latter was in prison. But the lives of most of the surviving Ovechkins ended tragically. Igor was allegedly killed by a cellmate while in pretrial detention for a new criminal case. Olga was beaten to death by a partner. Ulyana died of pneumonia, and Sergei died under unclear circumstances in 2009.